Hello, thank you for joining me on this short video on E. coli o157. My name's Andy Bowles and I'm a food lawyer, and this is the 24th video of a series of 100 videos on UK food law topics. So you may be watching this on our YouTube channel, free of charge, or you may choose to subscribe to our online training website. If you are on our online training website, in addition to this video, you can watch a webinar which is about an hour long on this topic. You can also download some supplementary reference materials to help you understand the topic. So, E. coli 157 is a food poisoning bacteria, and it's particularly dangerous because firstly, it can cause infection, serious infection, and even death in vulnerable persons, the very young and the elderly, at very, very, very low levels. In other words, you only need a few bacteria to cause infection. The exact number is not really known. I mean, it's speculated it could be as low as 10, it could be as low as 100. But when you're talking about numbers of bacteria, that is fiendishly low. If you think about salmonella food poisoning, that needs hundreds of thousands of bacteria to cause infection. So because it is a very low infective dose, that's the terminology used, it means that you have to be very careful with hygiene controls to prevent foods from becoming contaminated. It can lead to serious illness and death, as I've just said, and has the ability to persist in food processing environments. It can live in a kitchen on a work surface for up to 48 hours. It can remain on utensils, equipment. It can even survive in quite dry areas for limited periods of time. E. coli o157 normally requires air to grow, but it can grow in the absence of oxygen, albeit very slowly. So even things like vat packing foods can actually lead to the bacteria growing slowly inside foods. How much E. coli 157 infection do we get? Well, as I said, the infections can be serious. For the majority of people, actually infection can lead to illness but not severe outcomes. It's really the very young and the elderly who are most vulnerable to E. coli 157 infection. But if you look at the numbers of infections in England and Wales, this is 1991 to 2018. Of course, it stops a little bit short. We did have quite a big outbreak in 2022, which would have pushed the numbers up a bit. But you're talking about something in the region of 800 cases a year. Unfortunately, amongst those cases, there have been a number of deaths. And so that's why any food business handling food should always have regard to putting in place adequate controls to prevent E. coli o157 infection. So the key messages basically are that this bacteria has a low infective dose. You don't need many bacteria to actually cause illness. The illness is severe and there isn't any really effective treatment. If someone becomes ill, they can't actually be subject to proper remedies. So the sources of E. coli 157, raw meat, particularly minced meat. If you have a raw beef, the contamination of E. coli 157 is likely to be on the outside of the beef joint. If you then mince it up, it can become incorporated within the minced meat, and then if you don't cook your burger properly afterwards, or whatever it is you're making, then the bacteria may survive. Soily vegetables, E. coli 157 can be found out in the environment, so in soil, and therefore if you're bringing soily vegetables into your restaurant or into your manufacturing area, you might be bringing the bacteria with it. Things like raw milk. If you're making soft cheese from raw milk, then there needs to be adequate precautions taken to prevent the outgrowth of E. coli 157. And then water. E. coli 157 can persist within the water supply, so therefore water needs to be potable, in other words drinkable in food environments. A key factor in E. coli 157 outbreaks has been the failure to prevent cross-contamination. If you've got E. coli 157 on raw meat or on soily vegetables, then you need to make sure that they're not transferred over to ready-to-eat foods. E. coli 157 is easily killed by catering temperatures. Normal cooking will easily kill it. But if you have a normal cooking of a burger which has killed the bacteria present, but then you have a food handler who's been handling raw meat and transfers even a small number of E. coli 157 onto that burger, then you could have problems. So the key messages here are when trying to prevent cross-contamination, which is a really key issue, physical separation between raw and ready-to-eat foods, hand washing by food handlers when handling foods, after they handle a raw food, and certainly before ever handling a ready-to-eat food, food handlers should be encouraged to thoroughly wash their hands. Disinfection of work surfaces of equipment, and having procedures that are properly documented so that staff can be adequately trained. The key is physical separation. If you can have an area in your kitchen, an area in your manufacturing facility where you only handle raw food, and a separate area, a designated clean area, then that is ideal, because with prevention of cross-contamination, separation between raw and ready-to-eat food is the most effective way. Of course, that needs to be supported by cleaning, disinfection, personal hygiene, particularly hand washing, and proper supervision, proper management. The Food Standards Agency have published guidance on control of E. coli 157. They work on the principle of this hierarchy. Separation is key. Cleaning and disinfection, making sure that the bacteria are removed from equipment and removed from work surfaces. Proper personal hygiene, proper staff training, and proper management controls is pretty much what the guidance says. But it also looks at some practical guidance on how to put in place physical separations. Let's run through this. You're in a kitchen now and you're handling raw meat and ready to eat meat. So you're maybe bringing in beef joints and you're handling cooked sliced beef. So ideally, we start right at the top. You probably can't read this behind me, but it doesn't matter, right at the top, by saying, well, can you do the handling of the raw beef and the handling of the cooked beef in separate rooms, completely separate rooms with separate staff and minimum transfer between those rooms. In other words, you don't have people walking in and out of the rooms unless they put in place effective hand washing, cleaning and disinfection between. That's the ideal state, and you'll find in most food factories that's exactly what happens. You'll have a raw food area and you'll have a ready-to-eat high-risk area. But in a catering kitchen it might be more difficult to provide. So the Food Standards Agency recognise that. So rather than having separate rooms, if that's not possible, then within a room you have separate areas. So maybe on one side of the room you'll be handling raw food. Raw beef, for example, could be delivered from your supplier, put in the fridge over one side, and then the ready-to-eat food is handled on the other side of the room by separate staff, or if staff are crossing the room, they need to wash their hands and take personal hygiene preventative measures. If that's not possible, well, you need to separate by time. This isn't ideal, but if you are, for example, handling raw meat, well, you can do it separate, but by separation of time. In some establishments, it might be possible to do the handling of raw meat last thing in the day, preparing for the next day or something. So you're not handling raw meat and then cooked meats. But that might not be possible. Depends on the sort of business you've got. If you've got staff who need to handle raw meat and ready-to-eat food, then the raw meat should perhaps be placed onto a chopping board. So red colour, you can see colour coding behind me. On a disinfected work surface. The raw meat is prepared. The food handler will then wash their hands, and the cooked meat, once it's placed on a disinfected work surface, but on a different colour chopping board. So in other words, you've got physical separation because you're using different colour chopping boards. So the raw meat will have a red one, for example, the cooked meat will have a yellow one, but the work surface underneath will also be disinfected, and the food handlers will be washing their hands and using colour-coded and separate equipment. Separation in time is sort of the last resort, really, because that requires far more management controls. If you've got separate rooms, you need less management supervision. If you've got separation by time, you really do need to be on it to make sure that staff know what they're doing what the procedures require them, and they understand why they're doing it, so that people are more likely to follow hygiene rules in those situations. Okay, so thank you for listening. That is, say, video 24 out of a series of 100. If you'd like to join me on the next video, there'll be, I say, 99 more of them. So I'm hoping you'll perhaps join me on one in the future. Thank you for listening.